Good morning. Deadly serious topic this morning. Simple question. Is there a housing crisis in British Columbia? I don't see any squatters occupying public buildings as they did in the 40s. I don't see anybody walking into army camps. I know there is a crisis in rent. I know the vacancy rates are supposed to be zilch. I know that rent controls have been on for 6 years. I know that if you want to build an apartment now at $50,000 a suite, a small apartment, you're going to have to, for a reasonable response, charge between $700 and $1,000 a month. What has gone wrong? Was it rent controls that caused it? Was it the fact that many people, 70% controlled rents, are getting cheap rent? What about the fixed income people? The whole problem is fraught with disaster at the moment, but can anything be done? The fact of the matter is that since 1972, the construction of rental units has slowed and slowed and slowed and slowed and stopped. And it stopped because there ain't no money in it anymore and governments haven't filled the bill. That's the topic. I don't pretend to be any expert. I'm one of the lucky ones. My house is paid for, no rental problems, you might say. I know there are many people who are scraping the bottom of the barrel to meet their rents in non-controlled flats. And there are many low-income people who, even though they're in controlled rents, are having an awful time to have enough money for clothes and food. I'm going to try and tackle this in a serious and straightforward manner this morning. And I have here Tom LaLonde of the Greater Vancouver Renters Association, represents a number of the old tenants organizations. I've got Jack Hayes, who is from the Rental Housing Council of British Columbia, and they've got 3,000 members. They're landlords, even though they're called the Rental Housing Council. They're landlords, 3,000 members all across British Columbia. And then sitting aside as an observer for the moment only is our rentalsman, Jimmy Patterson. He's going to baffle us with science and footwork later in the program. I only, apart from myself, have one other politician as such here this morning. Jimmy Chabot couldn't make it. We might do him out of Victoria next week. But the politician I have here, who will, of course, have all the easy answers, is Norm Levy from the New Democratic Party in Victoria, and he will be contributing to the program too. I want, first of all, to go to the tenants man, Tom LaLonde. Tom, you heard what I said at the beginning of the program, that nobody's squatting. I don't see any homeless in schools or in Legion halls or in streets. How bad is the crisis? Is it a crisis of space or only a crisis of money for the people whom you represent?
I think it's a crisis of both, actually. If you look at the figures from the Red Door Rental Aid Society, they are housing now more people in emergency housing through hotels, motels, whatnot, than they have at any time since their existence.
How many would that be, though?
Several hundred at various times.
And you mean the human resources is paying rents for people in hotels, disaster cases who for some reason or another may have been evicted or come here with no place to live?
Yeah, I think you'll find that the crisis is affecting especially families, people with children.
Now, as the Renters Association, do you have any straightforward, simple, legislative means by which you think this problem could be straightened away and solved?
Yeah, we think that some of the federal tax incentives that used to exist should be re-implemented. There are some programs that could come from the provincial government as well, incentives from the provincial government towards landlords to build. Another problem is the demolition of affordable housing that's available now, and the city has done very little to stop that, and many people are putting out of affordable housing now, into a market that they can't afford.
Apart from the fixed income people, whom we know suffer, unless they happen to be in a non-profit place with a reasonable rent, a proportion of their income, the average working man with good union wages who is in a controlled rent is pretty well off?
They're doing rather decently.
Now I go to Jack Hayes of the Rental Housing Council of British Columbia. Would you agree with me that we have a crisis of space to some degree, no vacancy rates in parts of the province, But that is not the problem. Do we have an actual crisis now which demands emergency action?
We have an income crisis with too many low-income people not able to not only pay rents but pay for groceries. That's one of the cardinal problems.
You're one of the landlords. Don't tell me your principal concern is the low-income people.
Yes, because it affects us. It affects us because they're not able to pay an economic rent.
Now, what about the other people? 70% of all units in British Columbia are under rent control.
Right.
Are you being cheated as landlords by these rent controls?
Well, in the last 3 years, Jack, we've had a 7% rent ceiling, and that's run 4% below the operating costs of apartment buildings. It's also run almost the same amount below inflation. In 6 years of rent control, the inflationary rate, and this is Stats Can, was 10.8%. How can you live with a 7% ceiling of rent when you have an inflation rate of 10.8? It just doesn't balance.
No businessman but supposing you've got an older apartment block that you built in the old days of cheaper labor. You have no mortgage. You can live with a 7% increase.
You've got repairs and maintenance, which become high after the building gets a few years old. You have to put on very expensive roof replacements, plumbing replacements. You have to renovate the inside, new appliances. All those costs, current costs, not old costs. You're paying current rates for those.
What you're telling me is that even mortgage-free in an old apartment, you can't live economically as a landlord on a 7% ceiling.
No way. Landlords don't want excessive profits. They want to break even today.
Oh,
and we'll talk about profits later.
Take the halo off
Oh, come
your
on,
head.
Jack.
You want profits. You want as much as the traffic will bear.
You
Of course
better
you
believe
do.
it.
Yeah.
But first of all, we want to cover expenses. And how can you cover expenses with a 7% ceiling when you got a 10.8 inflationary factor and you've had it for 3 years? How can you do that?
If you wanted to build a 6-suite apartment block today, 1-bedroom apartment, what would it cost you per unit? I use the figure of $50,000.
It runs $40,000 to $50,000 depending on the land cost and how well you're going to build it. But
all right, $50,000.
Contractors are saying today it's over 40 and it's below 50.
All right, $50,000 a unit.
Right.
And we'll presume you have your own money. No, it's unlikely you'd have your own money.
No, most people don't.
All right. What economic rent would you have to charge on a modest $50,000 1-bedroom apartment complex, a small one? What is the economic rent that you would have to charge?
The minimum rent would be $650. Minimum rent.
And if you had to borrow from the bank at 20% for your construction, what would you do?
Pardon?
If you had to borrow from the bank a bridge loan at 20%.
Well, as you know, interest rates have gone up 12 times in the last 2 years. They've gone up 7%. Now, multiply 7% times $12 per cent. That's how much the cost per month has gone up per suite. That's $84 per month per suite. It's gone up just for financing.
A loan?
Just a loan for financing.
In the past, how long?
2 years. Just 2 years this month. 24 months, it's gone up 12 times. 7%, from 10 3/4 to 17 3/4. They're now quoting 17 3/4 for mortgage renewals as of this week.
So therefore, if you had any money right now, you'd go to the States and build.
I haven't found a politician or a landlord or a news media man who would put his money into rental housing. I'd like to know one, because we got places for sale.
Is there any answer?
Yes.
Is there any immediate answer?
Yes.
What is it?
Face the facts. Charge inflation for whatever you're selling or providing. It's got to be an inflationary rate to get your money back or you won't invest. That's one thing. The second is the tenants need help. There's low-income people, pensioners. They haven't kept up with inflation, so let's take a look at that.
70% of all the rental accommodation is under control right now.
Right.
And we'll say that's a maximum $300, $350 in certain cases, right?
Yeah. And
if you have an uncontrolled apartment, the average rent today would be what, $600?
$500 to $600 for a 2-bedroom apartment you're talking about. Yeah, $500 to $600.
So therefore,
that's minimum.
The market is controlled really by the controlled rents.
Yeah.
Are these people in the controlled rents, the working people, the union men, are they stealing the landlord's money because of rent controls?
I think there's a lot of people in there that are not the working men that have got money to pay more rent, and they're getting a pretty free ride.
You'd scrap rent controls as the first thing.
Oh, I wouldn't do it today. No, I think there has to be a program a deceleration of program. And I think we got to fix up the other problems first. I think we have to fix up the low-income people. We have to provide incentive plans to build. Let's get those two things going real good.
Even
And
that
then-
would take 10 years.
Well, it's going to take years for
Webster
sure.
and the housing crisis after the break. Here I am at our maps and boards with the man who can give us all, I think, the official data on the crisis. And his name is Jim Patterson, and he is the Rentalsman. You've had this wonderful job for how long?
Just about 2 years now, but I've been charged for rent controls for 5.
Do you sleep nights?
Well, sometimes, but certainly the antagonism is growing in the marketplace. The tenants are getting more antagonistic, and so are landlords, and being in the middle makes us the bad guys to both sides because we're an obstacle.
Don't plan to get involved in individual complaints or injustices this morning. By the way, do you own your own home?
Yes.
Mortgage paid off?
No.
Not paid off. Now,
And I've been a landlord and a tenant.
I want to know what has happened to rents in relation to incomes, because I said off the top this morning, it used to be a rule of thumb that you calculated 25% of your income for shelter. Have you any figures on that for me?
Yes. At the moment, the average income going to rent is below that. The mean is more like 18%. The problem is more distribution of income, in that about half of the tenants are paying over 25%, and about a quarter are paying over 35% of their gross. So it's more how the income is distributed. But the 18% is a little bit misleading. If the ex-Shah of Iran should move to BC, that number would go down to 2%, and we'd say, well, there's no problem at all. But
I
it still
thought
is for some.
70% of all rents in BC were controlled.
Yes.
So therefore, 70% of maximum rents of up to $350. Is that right?
Well, the controls right now are 1 bedrooms under 300, 2 bedrooms under 350, 3 bedrooms under 400.
At what levels? I mean, what
Oh,
levels?
7% per year.
At 7% per year. Are the actual maximums there for 300, 350, and 4?
Right. For units built prior to January 174.
And if I put up the rent beyond that as a landlord and you approve it, it comes out of control.
You're right. If it is under 500, there's still a review, there's an appeal. But once it's over 500, then there is no appeal at all. Or if the unit was built after January 1, 1974, there is no appeal.
Therefore, if we look at this map here, let's have a look at this map.
Okay.
Does this map show me, let me do it my way first of all, these are controlled rents.
All rents.
All rents, an average of all
Yes.
rents. And this is the average weekly wages in BC when?
Starting 1961, going through to 78. We don't have last year's data yet, which will show somewhat of an increase in rents.
Rents, therefore, have stayed well down on the cost of living,
Yes,
cost of rent
yes.
index in relation to income.
Yeah, it's important to identify what the problems are and what they are not. So what these graphs are attempting to do is to show, because commonly we're hearing what the problems are is, oh, rent control caused all the problem, our rents are running outrageously, and so on. In fact, and the first point to make is that the average rent, the mean rent, is going up less than, this is the CPI, the rate of inflation, and less than the wage index. So in the aggregate, there is not a rent problem in the aggregate.
There is.
Oh, yes. But I mean, well, there's a housing production problem, certainly, and there's an income distribution problem. But the
And there's a
meaning,
housing problem because you can't economically build a unit
oh,
at the
that's
level
right.
which
Okay,
you can
yes.
rent.
Yeah, this is, I'm just talking now about income paid.
Okay, do it on the air, Webster. Be messy. Vacancy rate in privately initiated apartment structures of 6 units over in Vancouver between 1963 and 1979.
Right. What this is showing
This is a percentage vacancy, is it?
Right,
So in 63 we had a 4.2% vacancy rate.
right.
Went up to almost 5% in 64, 65. What caused it to drop in 67 to just above 1?
For one thing, the market has always been cyclic, in that the industry will tend to build. You get a vacancy rate this high, and you are inclined not to build. That's a very high vacancy rate.
Don't have to.
Right. And because of the lead time, as the vacancy rate goes down, because of demand, interprovincial immigration, then the industry starts to build. Then what happened in here...
Built up therefore in 1971-72 to a 4% vacancy rate because of new construction, because of the federal tax.
Yeah, there were incentives during this period, and these incentives were being taken advantage of. What happened in 1971 is the federal government eliminated the capital cost allowance.
Now put that in English though.
Okay,
in other words, doctors, dentists, and all
Right.
these big money professionals could put the money in frame apartment blocks right off the depreciation against their income.
That's right.
Have an appreciating capital asset, not pay any income tax.
That's right, which
That built the apartment
right,
blocks.
it had the effect of you could put on new rental housing and charge lower rents than you would otherwise charge. So the benefit is passed on to tenants. When that was taken off by the federal government, we went down and we had a dramatically reduced vacancy rate. In this period is when rent controls were introduced. Now, it's important to note because, and I'm sure if you opened up the phones, we could get people that would call in and say, clearly rent controls have caused all the problem. Get rid of rent controls, and there will be all kinds of building at $708
We don't have to
a
open the
month,
phones
you know.
to do that.
Sure,
I
I'm
can
sure
tell
we-
you that. I mean, here was the federal tax incentive eliminated. That was a big thing.
That's right.
NDP elected in 72.
Rent controls.
Rent controls slapped in there.
introduced as a result, not as a cause of the housing situation, but as a result of the housing situation.
I'll concede, as a result,
Yes.
vacancies were at a minimum. Landlords were gouging in the extreme in the 70s. I was around. I did all the
73 and
programs
4,
on
right.
it. And for on its philosophies and whatnot, the NDP froze the rents. Much tougher than they are at the moment, too. So that was part of stopping the construction. Because if you were a landlord, you weren't going to build up under universal rent controls.
Well, it was not so much the rent controls. It was in here, without any incentives, it was very expensive to build. And indeed, what happened, in 1975, the federal government reintroduced a tax incentive program, the ARP program.
Not so good as the other one, though.
Well, it was, yes, it was, except it was short-lived. It was
1
a good,
year.
Yeah, it was a good program. And indeed, even though there were rent controls, we had record construction going on in this period.
You're making the point that with the proper federal tax incentives,
You'll get
even with
construction.
rent controls, the boys
People
with the
will
money
build.
will build blocks.
Right. Now, my own philosophy is you get rid of the housing problems and rent controls become redundant. I'm not a supporter of rent controls. I would like to see a marketplace
You're the
without them.
rentalsman.
But I would like to see
You're a civil servant. How
that's
you dare you say such a thing?
Because I would like to see a marketplace that didn't need rent controls. I think we'll always have rent review. I think we need that to get the individual gouging cases or somebody trying to evict via a large rent increase. But a workable market is, I think, everybody's common objective.
Now you have enough of that. I understand. that.
Because
okay, we
it went
agreed.
down here because this is when the federal government
Move.
changed it again, eliminated the incentives,
We're
down we go.
unanimous in that.
Okay.
We're just a little bit out of sync on rent controls also being a great disincentive for the free enterpriser.
Yeah, if you wanted to be facetious, you could say, and you ignored all the tax arguments, you could say, gee, rent controls were brought in here and the vacancy rate went up, the government started to phase them out and it went down. Maybe we should have more rent controls and that'll get building.
Later
of
on,
course, ridiculous argument.
You're remarkably free-speaking for a civil servant. You used to be in business, though, didn't you?
Yes.
That's your saving grace, I suppose. There isn't any answer.
Well, the answer, not simple answers. I think the federal government has an important
We'll
role.
talk about that later with Jim Patterson, the rentalsman. Now we're going back over to my comfortable seat. Oh, I'm on. Reintroduce the panel. First of all, we'll go to Tom LaLonde, the Greater Vancouver Renters Association, Norm Levy. He's not, in fact, a housing critic, but he is a consumer critic for the NDP. Jimmy Chabot couldn't make it on the microwave this morning. He's the Minister of Lands for Social Credit. And on this side, of course, you met Jim Patterson a moment ago, the rentalsman, and you met Jack Hayes of the Rental Housing Council of BC. Where do we start, gentlemen? Let me put to all of you the simple question. Are we agreed that there is a crisis in space, a crisis for some people in rents because they haven't got the money to pay it, but that there is, in fact, no panic in the streets about people being thrown out of their houses. Would you agree on that?
There's no panic yet, but the problem is that it is clearly going to get worse before it gets better. In the short term, BC typically experiences its interprovincial immigration during the summer, as there's virtually no new housing on stream, and the federal government has not yet announced any incentive programs. We will expect further interprovincial immigration this summer and no new housing to accommodate that. So that will exacerbate the problem in the fall.
Can we really expect, I didn't get a chance to check it out yesterday, can we really expect, and we've got no one here really on private home ownership, a substantial increase in foreclosures because of this mortgage crisis, the 6-month mortgage, the 1-year mortgage at 16, 17, 18%. Can we expect that, Mr. Levy?
Oh, I think so. And I think that one of the things is an element in this that you haven't discussed, looking at it from both sides, people who are trying to buy houses and people who are in the rental game, who are also trying to borrow money from the banks. I mean, they're suffering that kind of pinch as well. So yes, things are going to get a lot worse. What we have now is a lot of warning signs that things are going to get worse because the vacancy rate is nil. As Jim Patterson points out, more people are going to come into the province. So where will we be 6 months from now? We'll be sitting here saying, yes, things are going to get even worse. So you have to look for some programs. We had to do this when we were the government. We were told there's no housing stock, so we moved to create housing stock. Put a great deal of money into it. Did something with the Housing Corporation. Did something with co-ops. Did something with senior housing.
That was all.
No, it's not all, Jack. It was there, a spit in the bucket, but it made the difference. It gave us the edge.
Well, let me go to Jack Hayes on this one. How many units, if you could wave a magic wand, or perhaps you can answer it, Jim, how many units would we need to create that highly desirable, reasonably competitive, forgetting the subsidies for low-income people for the moment, which we all appreciate, to give you a 5% vacancy rate?
Well, I don't think you need a 5% vacancy rate, though.
What do you need?
Well, we notice one of the ways of regulating how the market works is the kind of disputes that we get and the volume. And we noticed even at about a 1.5% vacancy rate, the market was very reasonable. The units that weren't under rent control were still only going up around 7%, even though they could charge more. So I think that a realistic objective even is about 1.5 end up as a minimum. And CMHC has done some work on this in addition to ourselves. And I think we're basically looking at something of the order of an implementation of 5,000 units plus some program that progresses after that so that there's a steady stream coming on. But we're about 5,000 short at the moment.
I thought we were about 100,000 short.
Oh, no. Not for rentals. There's only 325,000 rentals in the province. Units in the province.
The addition of do you agree that the addition of 5,000 units, you see what he's saying about you people, he doesn't mean to be nasty, but the implication is there, that when you're under when there's competition in the housing market, you are much better landlords. Is that right?
Well, basically, and tenants are better too. I think it's a two-way
They can
sword.
go if they want to, they don't feel strapped.
There's no question that the hostilities from both sides, if I go out in this rental market and talk to a landlord association meeting or a tenant association meeting, the militancy is just noticeably different from 6 months ago, and people are worked up, and therefore they're going to be worked up with each other, and indeed our phones are ringing off the hook from both landlords and tenants complaining, all wanting to blame us or each other or somebody, because it is not a market where there's any equality in bargaining power.
Do you as a renter feel that the answer of this needed 5,000 and tax changes should be done by the government?
Yes,
Build
sir.
the barrack blocks for the workers, hey?
Well, I don't know about building the barrack blocks, but I think that government has to play a role in it. I don't think we can
How
expect
big a role?
A major role. I think that there has to be some government building. I think that there has to be some major subsidies given to landlords.
One of the troubles, of course, with government building is that that's all got to be unionized at fantastic cost, whereas most building of a small apartment block is done on a non-union basis and a little cheaper. Is that not correct?
Yeah, but I think in this province we accept the value and the need for unionized people. Most of the construction workers now are unionized.
Not in house building.
As long as you can get, you're talking about the very small fellow that's building his own building, eh?
Oh, no, house building is not unionized. Believe you me.
Well,
Office building is
depends
unionized.
who's doing the job, Jack. There's a lot of other people using unionized labor. We have to have 500 to 600 units a month to stand still. That creates no surplus. So if today, if you started to build 500 units per month in the Greater Vancouver Regional District, at the end of 12 months, we would still have no vacancies.
That's 6,000 a year, Jimmy.
Sure. But we were building at that rate in 76 and 77.
You mean 6,000 units a year?
Why, sure. All
Not
of them.
just these condominiums.
Yeah. No. Just rentals.
Single family.
Of all kinds. Of all kinds.
All kinds.
All kinds. Yeah.
Okay, tell me, you speak for an awful lot of people. And if you can get the ear of both premiers, what do you want? Now.
Right now?
I mean, facing the fact that the interest rates are perhaps largely out with their control to some extent.
Yeah.
What do you want right now?
Lower interest rates and the MERB, reintroduction of the MERB, that's the capital cost allowance. Those two things will start construction rolling right away.
Lower interest rates you ain't going to get.
Well, why not? Why not? The provincial government recently brought out an interest program which worked. Within 1 week, all the money was used up. That says if you get the right interest rate, you'll get the construction.
You're talking about the $20 million. They said it was a
Yes.
$200 million program at 9 3/4.
75 million went to rentals.
And that's
Wasn't
all
it?
that would do it.
Well, that 75 million is what? Three months supply of new rental units. It wasn't enough. It was a good idea, but it wasn't good enough. In Alberta, they've had a rental program to subsidize interest rates. Now, we haven't got the money of Alberta, but the idea is that if you have the right interest rate, you'll get the stimulation of construction. No question about it.
So therefore, you as a good free enterpriser want your tax money used to subsidize interest rates for apartment owners who want to build small rental blocks, right?
Yeah.
Now to Mr. Levy. What would you do? Forget your co-op things. They were never that popular anyway, were they?
But they're going. Minister announced yesterday they've got 5 projects in 1979.
Well, they've
you can't disregard those. You can't disregard.
Most people
the whole
don't
business of
want them.
renovation.
Most people want their own house or an ordinary commercial rental
I
unit.
think, yes, it's true that most people want their own house.
Okay.
This last budget, it calls for borrowing of $1.2 billion for Crown corporations. That's for Crown corporations. That's future debt. Has nothing to do with creating housing, really nothing to do with creating jobs. Now, surely there's an allocation of resources which is misplaced. The $200 million, which really costs the government about $8 million in terms of the cost of making up the difference between the 9 3/4 up to whatever the rate is. We called for the other day that looking at $500 million, even up to $1 billion of investment, the private enterprise people are not looking at that. They're down in the United States, but they're down there for other reasons besides the fact that they can't make too much money. It takes too long to get anything on stream in this province, in most provinces in Canada. Hurdles that take a year, 18 months to get anything on. That's got to be looked at. Very serious.
No, you've lost me there. Are you saying that there should be $500 million put
least
in
500.
to subsidize interest rates?
To go through, yeah, exactly. Because that's the kind of stimulus that you get. As Jack points out, within 3 or 4 days, not within a week, was all oversubscribed 3 times. 3 times. That's how much
Let me get this.
demand there is.
The
out
free
there.
enterprise. You are a free enterprise.
Absolutely.
And you're a socialist, social democrat, democratic socialist.
Socialist is fine. Socialist is fine.
Oh, you are?
Yes,
I want to
yes,
ask you what kind of socialist, because
Not today. Let's get on with the housing.
You're saying that one way to do it is $500 million now.
As a minimum. As a minimum.
As
absolutely.
an interest subsidy to create housing, rental and privately owned in British Columbia.
What are you talking about? You're talking about housing, you're talking about jobs, you're talking about the forestry, you're talking about the spin-off industries, you're talking about doing a number of things at the same time. That's what you've got to do. What are you going to do? Take the money and put it into Crown corporations and then argue with the people that you're not interested in creating future debt? That's what they're doing, but it doesn't generate any jobs.
If you put the $500 million into subsidized interest rates right now, Jack, you'd get most of it back, except you'd get all the other capital and interest back, wouldn't you?
Yeah. You don't have to subsidize in perpetuity, but we've got to go weather the storm of high interest rates. At some point in time, the rates will come down, hopefully,
Well, this program's only
and
3
mortgages
years anyway.
will be renewed, and then hopefully that subsidy can disappear.
Yeah,
Jimmy?
Yeah, the point on a subsidy is the net cost is not the gross cost, because you get some of that back. If you spur new construction, that's jobs, you tax those people, you get the forest industry going, and there's materials that go into that housing. So they're not as costly as they initially appear to the taxpayer. And federal governments in every major Western country other than Canada at the moment have an incentive program in place. It's in the United States, it's in Britain, it's in France.
In every country except Canada.
Yeah, there is some form of a housing program at the federal level, which
Look,
and there
what
isn't
will
here.
happen if we do nothing? The government will invest an enormous amount of money in the business of assisting people on welfare, more people will go on welfare. You've got a whole serious problem of taking government money and putting it into income support, or you're going to take government money and put it into job creation and provision of housing. That's the decision you have to make.
You're a socialist.
That's what we had to look at when we were government.
I'm going to let them think and say what they want to say in conclusion of this part of the program after the break. What was it that McKechnie said yesterday? Who's going to, McKechnie being, I think he's the Minister of Finance, he's somewhere out in the Maritimes.
Yeah, he said they don't have any money to assist in the mortgage problem. Made that quite clear. I think he also indicated that he's not sure that there is a serious problem. But certainly he said there's no money for us.
If you forget the little things that provincial governments can do, and the NDP did admittedly do a fair amount in co-op housing.
Don't be quite so grudging in that. They did it.
NDP did a fair amount of co-op housing and whatnot, and they had that.
Seniors housing,
Seniors
Present
housing.
government
affordable
still has
housing, social
programs
housing.
too,
They
yeah.
still have programs
Yeah.
too. Is this largely dependent on the action of the federal government, from your point of view as a landlord?
Primarily the construction, but not the support programs, because the only support program that the federal government has is the old age pensioner and the supplement. All the other support programs are provincial, everywhere you go. And so you got to have better support programs as part of the balance of solving the problem.
Are you an expert on these support programs at all, Jim Patterson? What are they?
Well, the SAFER is one of the big ones. It's
Shelter aid for elderly
right,
renters.
yes. And GAIN is the one primarily for low-income people. And I guess the point is that if you want to look at the solution, the longer-term solution, depending on how you define a solution, but if you want a market that is somewhat workable, there's a few components to getting there. One of them is the federal role in making new construction affordable through some kind of an incentive program at the construction end, at the production end. The other element is you may have to let rents rise in the average, in that, recalling that previous chart of where rents are going up substantially less than other costs. That has some problems. It makes, for the average person, rental housing cheaper with time, and the demand increases for rental housing. So if rents are going to float at all, then you need income subsidies to offset that, because there are some serious problems with the lower income groups in any such adjustment. So if you take a given that you're going to go to that kind of a market, then you're going to experience some rent adjustments. You're going to need some subsidy programs in place to take care of that, and you're going to need some production subsidies in place, so you don't have to charge $800 a month for a one-bedroom.
One thing I want to check with you before I turn to Mr. LaLonde and Norm Levy. 70% are under controls. Was that right?
That's right.
Do you think that the rent controls have given some, reasonably well-paid occupants of rental houses too much of an edge? Do you think that in some of the rent controls, considering the incomes in those houses, they're too low?
It's a difficult question to tackle. I think there may be some validity to that.
You see, I'm looking at the disparity between 300, we'll say 350 in a controlled rent, and a couple across the road in an uncontrolled rent are faced with $650 for the same accommodation. What do you say to that, Norman? Do you think rent controls were brought in a crisis, right? Yeah. I was one of those.
It was an anticipated crisis. We had the income. We were worried about whether that would disappear overnight because of the rent gouging. You were part of that.
Yeah, sure I was. Right. But is it not a fact that perhaps rent controls in some place give some people too much of an edge? He told us from 25% of shelter, which is maybe high with today's affluence, it's down to 18%.
But what you're talking about are people who've got fairly good incomes that can manage it. Nevertheless, it's still high because it eats into their other money, that kind of discretionary money. But that's not where the problem is, We're dealing primarily with a lot of people on fixed incomes. But I'd just like to move for a minute, Jack, to another group that we haven't talked about.
Who's that?
Let's talk about the group of the guy who's worked for 20 years. He's paying, for instance, a mortgage of $481 a month because it's 11%. Now he's renegotiating his mortgage and it's 15%. All of a sudden he's got to go up to $623. He's got to find another $142 a month. No change in his income, He's just got to find that money. Now, we can't ignore those people. When we keep talking about supports and subsidies, We're not simply talking about people on fixed incomes. We're not talking about people on welfare. We're talking about a whole group of people who have never been, they've been the taxpayers who provided all this support. Now they themselves need some help.
Criminal.
Well, of course, this is where it's a serious, serious problem, because the very people that carried the load now have to be part of the burden.
Just to add a point to that, is that that particular problem does not only exist for homeowners. It is facing landlords and tenants, in that the rent control system in British Columbia, and most of the ones in Canada, are based on a cost pass-through. I don't entirely accept arguments that
People
if your
miss a cost pass-through.
Right.
In other words, you've got to charge everything on your rent. All your costs must be charged on your
increases in
rent.
costs are passed on to tenants via increases in rents. That's why although we've had a lot of agreement, it seems today, one of the areas that I don't agree with is the 7% increase in rents has lowered the profit of landlords, that they can't offset their costs. Because if they can't, we will automatically give it to them. They can come in and fill out a one-page application. We'll give you all increases in costs, because that's the basis of this rent control system as it was originally introduced. Now, the point is,
Making faces over here.
no, I know it'd be nice not to make an application. It'd be nice to have a free market, but when you have a zero vacancy rate, I just don't think that's realistic. So the point is that as landlords refinance their mortgages, and they come into our office, I will give them the increase in interest.
Even if it's an 18% mortgage.
That's right, because my terms of reference are not to put landlords out of business, not to bankrupt landlords. So I must say, all right, your costs, and I've seen them, they're coming in now, and in some cases we're increasing rents $75 a unit to offset mortgage refinancing.
This
And
applies
I
to
can't do anything
everything
about
which
it.
comes under the purview of rent review up to $500 a month.
No, everything, period. Even if it's under the 7%. If you're refinancing your mortgage and a tenant believes that they're only liable for a 7% interest, and their owner refinances and goes from 10% to 16%, my mandate is not to bankrupt
Got
landlords.
it clearly. And you were shaking
go
your
through.
head as if you didn't believe him, Jack Hayes. I mean, I'm fascinated for your financial health to hear that when your mortgage goes up, fill in a one-page form, wham, the tenant's got to pay it.
How can you treat landlords like children? Would you ask a university student to put up his hand to go to the bathroom? Do we have to fill out a form and ask every time we want to raise a rent? Surely we haven't come to that point in society. You know, that's not fair. That's not reasonable.
But that's not the point I'm making. Under the controls at the moment, you can recover your cost pass-through.
Well, it's starting to show that way on interest, and that makes a lot of sense. And I believe we would all agree that if interest rates go up beyond our control, it has to pass through.
Tell me, do you have to be a lawyer nowadays to run an apartment block and deal with Jim Patterson and his merry men
Well,
and women and persons?
I don't think you have to be a lawyer to deal with Jim Patterson, but I think you have to be a lawyer to interpret the law and understand what it means.
But still got to use,
go
if
through
you're a
all this paper
landlord,
process.
still got to use the special forms, and you can't do this and you can't do that?
For what?
For anything you want to do
some
as a
forms.
landlord.
Okay, it's a good point, so let me just spend 1 minute on it. There's a few forms. We have less regulation than other provinces. I have recommended to the government a number of changes that landlords will like, that are simplifying procedures, not taking away tenant rights, but rather simplifying, cleaning up some of the procedures, some less forms, and so on. And I can agree it would be nice to not have to hold up your hand, nice to not have to use a form. The point is that those units in the market today that are not subject to the 7% limit are going up at 18 to 20% average. And to get an average increase of 18 to 20%, that means some people are giving 35 and 40%. So if you were to say, okay, you don't have to hold up your hand, you can charge whatever you want, then in this rental market, that's a big problem. And I don't think the responsible landlord associations, and I include the Rental Housing Council in that, I think they're reasonable people, are suggesting that overnight we get rid of rent controls. Because if you got rid of rent controls overnight, I can absolutely guarantee you what would happen. You would get a shift of rents of 20, 30% in the marketplace. It would still cost you $800 to build a new place, so no one would. You'd get some doubling up, and you'd have a large transfer of income. You'd have some income problems that have been discussed, and that's it.
You agree
So
with
you
that?
have to
agree
do
with
the other
that?
thing.
You
Yeah,
agree
but
with that?
I didn't say, earlier in the program, I did not say controls should come off right now. I mean, you got to be sensible about this thing. There has to be a phasing. nobody has mentioned appeals yet. And the problems that Jim has just mentioned about the high rent increases, we don't disagree with the appeal system. The appeal system is working apparently, and we don't disagree with that at all. But we want a proper ceiling on the rent, on the rent limit, so that we can cover our expenses, and leave the appeal system there until we don't need it. There's nothing wrong with that. That will protect these people.
Look, they went to decontrolling certain rents, 78. You know, the minister said, there's affordable housing around. The minister responsible for the Housing Corporation said, there's affordable housing around. Their own reports indicated that down the road, because there was nothing being built, that they were going to have a crisis. He even underwrote it. Mayor said, it's not to say that 6 to 12 or 18 months down the road, we're not going to have a crisis. Well, we have a crisis.
Yeah.
You know, what kind of a plan do you take? We're looking at a long-term plan here. Not going to be solved overnight.
Tom LaLonde, Greater Vancouver Renters, and Norm Levy. Break. I don't know if we're solving anything or helping you to solve it, but maybe it's been some good conversation this morning. Tom, have you any radical solutions you want to push in?
Not radical solutions. Something I wanted to take issue with, though, is the fact that there are landlords right now lobbying the government, I know, to remove rent controls totally. And I think that we have to look at that in the fact that it would affect people such as senior citizens and people on fixed incomes. With a rental housing shortage as we have now, people would in fact be afraid to dispute an increase simply for fear of eviction, because where would you go? And this is especially hard on senior citizens because you know, a moving endeavor to them is a major undertaking, and I think it's one case to be said of maintaining the 7% rent increase, the rent increase level. I am concerned that the ceiling was lowered from 500 to 350. And I know we at the Vancouver Renters Association would like to see that ceiling reinstated to 500, simply because the price of the housing has gone up, and people on fixed incomes, you know, their income levels haven't gone up that substantially.
Working people in rental housing now have no bleeding hope whatsoever of getting out of the rental housing into their own home with any kind of reason. And I see some character the other day was advocating, take a 5-year mortgage now at 15% because it won't get any less.
Yeah,
Did you see that? You know, he should be taken out and something done to it.
Well, I think there's a problem.
I mean, imagine a youngster on a reasonable income, even if both of them are working, paying 15%. How long does it take to double your mortgage at 15%? About 5 years. You know, your mortgage is doubled.
Well, it costs you $37,000 over 5 years, and the total you'll pay over 25 is $186,000.
At 15%?
At 15%.
Mind you, by that time, you as an MLA will be getting $500,000 a year and an index pension of $110,000.
We haven't been told that.
No, I know you haven't. Any other broad topics? I haven't gone to the phones early this morning. I wanted to keep it kind of sane.
Let me put one thing to you, Jay. Back in the 30s, when they had a similar problem, there was some legislation in some provinces that called for a moratorium on mortgage rates. You know, I asked this question of the minister 3 years ago. This was when we were getting a large number of foreclosures, when there were problems, and
yeah, I remember.
We were looking at foreclosures then, you know, whether we could hold them off. All right, we've got everything now. We've got mortgage rates, we've got high foreclosures, and no remedial action at all. Now, what do? Do we sit back, because we had yesterday from the Minister of Finance federally, we can't do anything. Now, it's no good the Premier of this province saying it's their fault. So that means nobody does anything and we just wait for the hole to get a lot bigger so as we can all fall into it. The only way that we're going to deal with this is to create more housing. Now, it's not going to solve the problem tomorrow. We've got the Rentalsman to protect basically the renters, all right? The apartment owners are having it tough, but it was the Socrates that dropped it from 10 to 7. We had 10.6, you know. That made some difference. That was an edge. But the only solution has to come in terms of really a massive housing program.
No, I'm very pleased with this morning, but there's one thing where you went wrong just now. You talked about a provincial moratorium. You couldn't have a provincial moratorium.
We got an answer from the minister that was a constitutional question. I said to the minister at that time, let's try it. Never mind this constitutional
But even at that, there's a
question,
common sense problem. You couldn't have a moratorium on mortgage interest rates in British Columbia and not have it in the rest of the country.
The point is that you have to, you talked about radical decisions.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you've got to look at a lot of options. What are we going to do? Allow this thing to get worse without any solutions at all? So you have to look at a number of things.
Well,
I would prefer to see the broad investment in housing, the extension of the mortgage subsidy program. That's the way to go.
The most depressing thing on this program this morning is that a man like McKechnie obviously doesn't know what's happening in the country.
No.
When he says there's no money available for mortgage protection of some kind, the man is out of his tree.
No, he's not. He's just carrying on the policy of Jean Chrétien. After all, they were only out of office 9 months. Jean Chrétien's, that's the policy that he had.
He
Now
just
he's
buried his head.
Sure.
He told us in writing that there was no problem, and they weren't going to do anything before they were defeated.
That was Chrétien.
Yeah.
Well, the old retreads are back in again, so we're going to be stuck with them for a while. Was Crosby better?
I think there's an
Crosby's in
opportune
China.
time here, maybe a little wishful thinking, but there's an opportune time right now. They're worrying about the West, and the resistance from the West because they don't have representation. I'd like to see Jim Chabot and your nominee go to Ottawa and camp there for a little while. After all, your leader in Ottawa has some strength of conviction and strength of negotiation in the House, in spite of the fact that there's now a majority government. I think both parties should go down there and start lobbying to beat hell about this thing.
Look, Jack,
Now,
there's a First
I'm not
Minister's
going to say you're going to
Conference
come
coming
back
up.
with a bag full of money, because it doesn't work that way. That's too easy.
There's a First Minister's Conference coming up. All right, Bennett has indicated where he wants to go. He says it's terrible what the federal government are doing. You've got to go down with some solutions. All right, he wants to say that he's done $200 million in mortgage subsidy. Well, he better be prepared to go a lot further than that and stick it to the federal government. What are you prepared to do?
I've got him on Monday morning here.
Well, then you've got to put it to it.
That should be good. Gentlemen, I must bring in Mr. Dyck from the Lower Mainland Apartment, so-and-so. Just a minute, let me get it right. John Dyck, President, Lower Mainland Apartment Owners Association. It's a smaller group than yours, but he's got to have his say. After the break. John Dyck is the president of the Lower Mainland Apartment Owners Association, and I do thank you for waiting for so long to get on the program, John. You're a smaller group than the Rental Housing Council. Whom do you represent and where?
We represent the eastern part of Vancouver, Coquitlam, Surrey, New Westminster, primarily New Westminster. We represent the smaller apartment owner. We do not represent the management companies.
You are the individual owners
We're
of
the
the
individual
smaller apartment
entrepreneur,
blocks.
that's correct, yes.
And are you still making a bundle?
That's exactly what some of the people think we do, make a bundle.
That's why I asked the question.
That's correct, yes.
Do you?
No, we don't. And that's exactly why we're saying that rent controls must be removed.
Are you the people who are conducting the write-in campaign to the government?
We are part and parcel of it. I would say that we represent the apartment owners who think with us. And in the province of British Columbia, who've been thinking all along the same way. And I would say that the government, they've been in rent controls for 6 years. I would say that they mismanagement housing, and I would say that they've had their chance and they should get out of it.
Well, I don't know what to put you. Do you think there's a crisis? Do you have a zero vacancy rate in all your blocks?
I would say that in the eastern part of Vancouver, the area we're serving, I don't think there's a crisis at this point in time. In our association, we have builders who have gone across the line, who are building there now. I'm personally myself, I'm involved also in the rental housing business in Texas, because when the rent controls came in, we just stopped building. Sure, it's not only one solution. It's not only a simple matter that by rent controls everything's going to be over. That's not what we're saying.
But the moment rent controls come in, you said enough of this, went down to Washington State, bought up the stuff cheap, put in strata titles, and now you're building in Texas.
That's not building in Texas, but we run rental properties in Texas. That's correct. Yes.
No controls down there at all.
No controls.
Do what
down
you
there.
like.
That's correct. Yes.
In other words, it's a free enterpriser's heaven.
It's a free enterprises heaven. Everybody is getting reasonable rates, reasonable rents, and the wages are low and the rents are lower, and the standard of living is higher.
That sounds like heaven, doesn't it? The wages are lower, the rents are lower.
Let's all go to Texas.
Yeah, let's all go to Texas.
What do we need? Inflationary dollars, right? That's what we're saying. And inflation has eroded so much.
But you're going to get nailed down there. They're now paying 19% prime bank rate in the United States. Are you borrowing money in the States at the moment?
I had a call yesterday from Texas, and I was offered a 9.5% mortgage on a wraparound deal on another apartment complex. What I'm trying to say is this here, that today when we look at looking just to see who's really gouging the tenant,
it's really not the tenant, the landlord who's gouging the tenant. It's just the other way around. When you look at $20,000 or $25,000 on per suite, and you calculate that at 15% interest, you're speaking about approximately about $300 on interest alone. You take costs about $125 to maybe $150 cost, taxes, services, and the like. You're speaking in terms of about $450 cost on one bedroom suite. Now, Jim will agree with me that today one bedroom suites are renting average on about $250 a month. Now, who's gouging who? There's a loss of $200 on replacement or market value on apartment
You're
buildings.
saying all tenants in controlled suites, would be the old age pensioners, handicapped, or ordinary working people, are gouging the landlord?
I would say that the government has created a situation that not only, as what we talked about, the taxation problems, the high interest rates, but we feel that we as a group of people, we should not be singled out. We should not be the group of people to subsidize others. I think it's the job of the government to do, not our job.
Jim, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, there's a few issues that are being mixed together there, but certainly this is not the only industry that's controlled. I mean, you know, come on, the farmers are controlled, your business is controlled, the mining business is controlled. There are regulations on all kinds of businesses
Land is controlled.
right, as to what they can charge and so on. So I don't think that the industry has been singled out. I don't believe for a moment that getting rid of rent control solves it, nor that it caused the problem. That's right, if you can get a 9.5% mortgage in Texas, I'd put my money there too. But whether there's rent controls or not, and if you get rid of rent controls here and do nothing else, it still costs you $800 a month to build a one-bedroom apartment. That's still what you need, and you're not going to build. Also, as I previously pointed out, we had a record year of construction after rent controls were brought in. So it is
74.
a great oversimplification.
74,
The carrot is there for landlords. They do clearly love to get rid of rent controls in this kind of a market.
But it's
you know,
the interest rates more
trust
than
me,
the rent controls, and the tax shelters more
well,
than...
to get the new construction. My whole point is you solve the housing problems and rent controls become redundant. As I said, I don't like rent controls,
Okay,
but I would
fair
never
enough.
get rid of them now.
Sure can talk when he gets going, can't he, Norman?
Well, he's an unusual type for a public servant.
Certainly is.
Outspoken right up front. Yeah.
He's the guy who says that you're gouging him.
We're gouging him. I fail to see that. I think his argument about concerning rent controls can be debated. As Jim pointed out, the first year of rent controls, there was quite a good amount of construction going on. And I don't think there's any statistics whatsoever that can point out that rent controls actually discourage building.
Okay, I'm going to go to the phones now. Can I take 5 people in here? One question for Jimmy Patterson, Jim Patterson, the Rentalsman. What are you recommending in the way of changes to the Rent Control Acts for the coming session, the present session of the legislature?
Okay, I can't, of course, talk about specifics that are before the legislature, but I can give you an idea of the direction we're going and some of the issues that are being raised. One is we are attempting to get some inter-ministry coordination to put some pressure on the federal government. I think this provincial government is recognizing that without their cooperation there's going to be a problem, so I think we're going to see an increase there.
Hammer the feds.
Right, hammer the feds, absolutely. And the second aspect of it is the income redistribution policies, whether or not they are adequate. So I'm raising that, the adequacy of SAFER and so on for the senior citizen groups, and I hope that we'll be looking into that on a interministry committee. Now, the specific areas that we're addressing, some are for the landlords, some are for the tenants. The areas that cause me concern that I'm raising to the government, from a landlord's perspective, is the adequacy of the 7%. Although you can get your costs passed through, it concerns me an ongoing system that is less than the rate of inflation. So that issue I'm raising to the government.
Ask for the rate of inflation for the increases.
The other area
10.6.
You mean you change them every Thursday afternoon?
yeah, right. The 7% will vary on a weekly basis. I hope not.
Joke.
That was a joke.
You got to say that on television because people think it's
I know they do.
Joke.
The other area is the regulations. In my opinion, the legislation over-regulates the industry, and that's not to the benefit of anyone, either tenants or landlords. If it's a nuisance to be a landlord,
Going to
if it's
simplify
too
the regulations.
we're going to simplify regulations.
With more regulation.
Now, the other area of, on the tenant side is I'm raising the issue of the adequacy of appeals for some of those tenants that don't have any protection, the ones that are getting the 20% rent increases.
That's about
been raised.
500.
Oh, and the units first rented after January 1 is 74.
Appeals at any
That's-
level of rents.
That's clearly a government decision, but I'm giving them the data and
Right,
what's happened to the
right.
market. I've raised the hotel-motel issue of there is not protection for permanent residents in hotels and motels, and that the government has announced that they've accepted. So
Good.
clearly there will be some extension there. And again, some of the simplification of procedures of making claims and so on, I think will benefit tenants and landlords. And the whole simplification means that our workload is a little easier to manage. And one of the basic problems, and I can't make any excuses for it, is that we are so swamped with work and so swamped with calls. Last time I was on this program, I said we get over 20,000 calls a month. We're now getting 35,000 calls a month, and the switchboard's still jammed, so we don't know how many people are out there trying to get assistance. So any movement that will make that easier will help.
Good.
What about condominium, Jim?
One of the changes is our office is going to get the Strata Titles Act to administer. There isn't much to administer at the time. It's just information giving, but we'll be reviewing that act, and that we know that the councils have some concerns.
Let me ask you, will you be playing any kind of function similar to the condominium commissioner that they have in New South Wales, which is the model for this kind of thing, you know,
Well,
kind of an ombudsman?
Yeah, the first step is to look at the problem in strata titles is everything has to go to the courts if there's
Yeah,
a problem.
right.
And although no decisions have been made at this time, I would expect that there will be some areas that someone will want to referee other than the courts.
Yeah, because that drives everybody crazy.
Well, it's a highly technical piece of legislation handled by lay people, basically. And that's
3 years ago, we had 5,000 unsold condominium units in Vancouver. Any idea what the stock is now?
No, it's probably around 1,000.
Look, Jack, one other question I want to ask you for people watching and worrying about. You're obviously well informed. Are we just going through an up phase now? Forget interest rates, will housing prices fall again, come up again within the next couple of years, or do you think that we're just going to go straight up?
I think the prices are unrealistic and they've got to fall back because we're already having the problem of people not just not having enough money to put the down payment, but they can't face the carrying charges. There's no way that the working man can face the carrying charges of the prices at the new rates. Some were having trouble under AHOP at the low rates, you know.
Levy won't like this question. We can't stop interprovincial immigration, that's for sure.
No.
Should we stop the immigration from other places where they come in and inflate the market with some incredible... They're knocking on doors in West Vancouver saying, you want to buy a house, we'll give you hundreds of thousands of dollars cash.
The
You're
immigration...
asking him or you're asking me? Well,
I'm
go
asking
ahead.
him, I just want to see a look in your face.
The immigration is a relatively minor thing compared to the migration from other provinces. The big influx of people is the migration from other provinces.
Okay, don't need to answer that question. I'm going to go to the phones. I don't know if they'll be on our broad topic this morning or just with a dagger to stick in your chest or his chest. Or maybe it's anybody but me. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
Morning. Good program here.
Excellent program. Good people.
I think I might have a partial solution for you. I don't know. You can take a look at it. There's a lot of basement suites around town right now that are illegal because of zoning bylaws.
That's to keep inspectors busy.
Yeah, well, there's lots of jobs there. But there's some that are being rented out on a hardship basis.
Okay, I've got the question.
Okay.
There are 16,000 illegal suites in Vancouver, 4,000 in Burnaby, God knows how many throughout British Columbia.
Yeah.
Would that help if you just said, wham, if they're 7'6" and clean, they're legal?
Well, there's your moratorium.
What I'm trying to get.
Okay, hold on.
Crisis
Legalize them
situation.
all, right?
People are living in
Alleviate
those
the shortage for
accommodations.
one thing.
Yeah, hold on a second. I want to let old Levy talk about this.
Well, that's an option, not a great solution. People are living in those places.
I've got a better one,
So,
which would make me popular where I live. In all the fancy districts, West Van, North Van, Shaughnessy,
no mother-in-law suites there.
Kerrisdale. There should be.
Yes.
If there's a crisis the way we're supposed to have now, I would say any house in any place which can pass simple tests for separate accommodation with separate access should be legalized regardless of local concerns about property values.
I think there's a good point there, because the problem right now is, and especially in Vancouver, where there's been a moratorium for years and years on illegal suites, is that many people in houses that could have suites are concerned because they don't know how long the moratorium will last. So in fact, it's getting dragged on, but why not call a spade? And if the municipality said, look, they're already proliferated in that area, we're going to let them go, and then these other people would have some confidence and they would convert suites. So it's not the whole solution, but it would help.
I think it would produce 10,000 units within a couple of years without any problem at all.
Well, bearing in mind that it's being bootlegged anyway and people are living in these places.
See, if you're well enough off in certain places, you can put in a suite for your servants. Servants, some of them have. Some big socialists have servants living in there.
Any solution that's going to make it possible for people to live in places other than tents.
Now, that's the thing for Bennett, isn't it? Bennett could say and initiate and say right now, zoning bylaws for the moment will be relaxed to allow straightforward, simple, additional accommodation of a satisfactory standard with its own entrance in any part of the province.
Yes, he has the legislation which he brought in about 3 years ago, giving him that kind of
Has
power.
he?
Yes, it's Bill 28, which came in 3
British
years
Columbia,
ago.
I think, is too attractive for too many people to live here. And if people come here to British Columbia, to Vancouver, especially to the West End, then I would say they should be prepared to pay the price. I think that there's too much consumption.
Well, you are a free enterprise.
That's
I
right.
tell you.
It
All the
is.
way.
That's right. I'm a builder by profession, and I know I've been building since the early '50s, you know, and I built hundreds of homes. And I think at this point in time, I think there's quite a bit of a housing consumption going on. Take, for instance, you will find one single person living, and I own a lot of two-bedroom suites in Coquitlam area. And you will find one person, two people living in a two-bedroom suite, occupying about 900 square feet.
What do you want to do about that?
Well, in comparison to, say, 15 years ago, I had to live in a basement suite.
You want other people to suffer like you did?
No, we should allow these basement suites, allow more space in a lot of these municipalities, and I would say there's a lot of space available.
Because I was a barefoot boy, I don't want other people to be in bare feet. Do you, Norman?
No way, no way.
Delivering milk.
I could just see the big guy going in there and saying, you've got too much space, move downstairs.
They've just changing the bylaws at Webster, and they're allowing all kinds of suites with a lot of things. You know.
Whistler is not for common people.
No.
Whistler is for all the big, wealthy, fat cats and the rest of it. And who cares? And they've got a special act anyway, haven't they?
Yes.
There's many widows, you know, that suddenly have lost their income and have a house with extra space. And the only way they can survive and keep their house is to rent out. And those people should be allowed to do that.
Yeah,
The problem with, we've got harassment at City Hall saying, well, we'll review it every year. This means every year for about 3 months it comes up and is debated, and those poor widows are sitting there frustrated and nervous because of what might happen to them. I'd say they should recognize a housing problem now that is not going to solve itself within 12 months and say, off with it. Moratorium for 5 years anyway.
Unless it's unhygienic or unhealthy.
But we got laws to cover that.
Agreed entirely.
Yeah.
Yes, but you go down to Skid Row and there's been thousands of regulation abuses which people are still living there. We're talking about people in houses where you're not
And
likely
the other
to
thing
live.
about our plan this morning is that you don't have to supply additional police protection, additional sewers, additional fire protection. Right. It's all built in, isn't it?
No effect on
The
land
simple
costs.
cost is the same.
This is supposed to be a telephone show. Are you still there?
Yes, I am, Jack.
Okay.
I think you guys have carried it along quite well from where I started it. I think it's up to the municipal governments.
No, it's up to Bennett.
Yeah.
I'll give Bennett a good belt on this on Monday. Okay.
It's a municipal
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good call. Yes, yes. No, don't. Hold on, please. Break. What are we going to do now?
Next call.
Next call. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just have a general comment on the whole overview of increasing rents and mortgages and all the rest of it. It comes down to the point where the people will just have to rise up and the revolution will take place. It's just a matter of time before the bottom falls out and all the big guys fall into the abyss with us. As a renter who's paying 47% of his income into rent,
do give me the figures if you don't mind, roughly.
well, roughly I'm making about $900 a month, and I'm paying almost $450 in rent.
How many children?
Two.
And your wife is not working?
She is working. I'm not. I'm the one at home. We've had to reverse roles.
Just because of the lack of job for you?
Yes.
Well, that must be a heartbreaker.
That's 50% of his income. If his food runs him up to 70%, he's at the poverty line.
That's the
an
point
income
of...
problem.
That's where you're at.
Yes, and
70% of your income on food and...
How many
shelter
bedrooms have you
and-
got in your apartment?
Pardon me?
2-bedroom apartment?
Yes.
And you're paying $450?
Yes.
that's the problem, which you can't just solve by saying, you know, if someone wants to look this person in the face and say, you're consuming too much space, we want to put your rent up because that's going to take care of our immigration next year. The solution is not as simple as getting rid of rent control and jacking rents up.
Let's take this man's question seriously. He said, just wait for the revolution and all the big boys will fall into the abyss as well. Maybe the answer, if the federal government does nothing about these extraordinary mortgage rates, maybe the answer will be massive government intervention with the old business, as I said, half-jokingly only, of building the barrack blocks a la Britain.
Look,
Or East Germany.
the most significant change that you get in any government is when you start getting the reverberations from the middle class, the middle income earners. When they start to really suffer, that's when the politicians really, really pay attention. That's what we're moving into now.
Jack, do you think the whole thing's going to come to an explosion one day?
No, I don't think so. I think that this gentleman on the phone has a real problem. He has an income problem, not a rent problem. I would suspect that this gentleman on the phone would like to have a job paying at least as much as his wife is making, and if so, he could pay the rent.
If they were
And he wouldn't have
$1,800 a
problem.
month, they could
Yeah.
pay the rent.
Now, one of our problems has got to be to find that fella a job or help him find a job so he can be self-sustaining. Not to say, well, we'll cut back the rents. That's not the solution at all. It's an income problem.
Good call. Tom, do you feel it's coming to a real militant stage?
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's a danger in getting into individual cases such as this man, but we can't ignore them. And I think that we have to look at the fact that people in this country are underpaid in many cases, especially people on fixed income. I know if a woman...
Fixed income and non-union.
Yeah, I know of a woman on welfare with 3 children paying $425 a month rent plus utilities because there is simply nowhere else for her to move.
Well,
And
under
she only
Gain,
gets-
as I recall, under Gain, Gracie consolidated all the allowances and stopped the overages, didn't she?
That's right.
That makes it tougher for people.
75% of overage, eh?
Yeah.
Cuts into your food.
Leaves you with about $125 a month to feed your children on.
If you stay a rentalsman for 10 years, you're going to have an escort. Eh?
I don't think I could last 10 years of being yelled at.
An armed escort. It's not funny.
You know, one of the interesting things that has happened to me is being called a fascist and a communist within about 60 seconds, which I find interesting. I can change that quickly, but
That shows you right in the middle.
that's right. Must be doing something right.
Must be
Neither
doing a
side
good job,
likes
yeah.
it.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to know what they think about a 43.5% rent increase. My rent went from $471 to $675.
What accommodation?
A 3-bedroom townhouse. The excuse was given they were going to upgrade it. 2 years ago, when our lease was renewed and there was a vacancy factor here, they were willing to give us a 2-year lease with a 7% increase, which we accepted. But now that there's a shortage, they're starting to gouge, saying they're going to upgrade. All they've done is thrown a little bark around.
And you've had to accept this increase?
Pardon me?
You've had to accept it.
Well, yes, where can you go?
Well,
We've got
she
2
mentioned rent.
children, and we have a bedroom for each. I work.
May
My
I-
husband works.
May I ask your income, roughly speaking, not to be too nosy?
No, 12, 17.
Between the two of you?
No, my husband is a commission salesman, so it fluctuates.
Yeah, they might make.
1,800.
Jack wants to know how much your total income is. Maybe 1,800?
It hasn't been, no.
1,600. 675 is still high.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thanks, ma'am. All we can give you for the moment is sympathy. We haven't solved anything, but you've certainly been a mine of information and opinion. And one thing I'll do is tackle Premier Bennett in some considerable detail. My thanks to Jim Patterson, Rentalsman, Mr. Dyck of the Lower Mainland Association, Jack Hayes of the Rental Council of BC, Norm Levy, NDP, MLA and Consumer Critic, and Tom LaLonde, Renters Association. Jack Webster, Monday morning with Premier Bennett, 9 a.m. precisely. I did it again.
Second week in a row that you forgot about me.
No, closed the program before you appeared.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Please forgive me.
Quite all right.
Monday.
We have the premier with us Monday morning.
I believe I did say that just before the break, didn't I? Oh, I'm real on the bit this morning. That'll be good. And then Victoria next week, Tuesday and Wednesday.
Right.
So we're going to be heavy on provincial politics next week. My thanks to Linda and to you. 9 a.m. Monday, precisely.